Bodiam Castle is a famous castle situated in modern-day Sussex, England. It was constructed in the late 14th century by a Sir Edward Dallingridge. As indicated by the Sir, yes, he was a knight, and he was close to King Edward III himself, which resulted in his accumulation of wealth. This wealth was used for the construction of his manor home, which became Bodiam Castle. The castle's strong walls and moat allowed it the potential to be used as a defensive point, and considering that it was built during the 100 Years' War against France, one might believe that it was meant to provide protection against a French invasion. However, the castle never actually saw any combat, and that is not because it was just never attacked. Most historians agree that this Mr. Sir Edward guy wanted to build this castle to show off his wealth and to provide himself with a very impressive place to live. The castle was built to impress, and the architecture has some important details that support this idea, and I will show you some of those later on. I have reconstructed the castle virtually using Minecraft. Modern pictures and videos from both ground and aerial perspectives of the interior and exterior were of great help in putting together the walls, the towers, and the moat. The problem is, since the 14th century, the castle has been reduced to ruins, which leaves the identity of many interior structures a mystery. Quite a bit of research was necessary in uncovering the original structures and hidden features of the rest of the castle. I have taken some liberties and added a few possible features and areas of detail that remain unclear to this day, simply to offer a completed picture that will allow you to see what the castle might have looked like in its prime. Here is Bodiam Castle once again, as it is in the 21st century, and here is my recreation with details that existed back in the 14th century. I'll put them side by side so that you can compare them. One important detail to notice is that the modern castle has no barbican, as the barbican has weathered away almost completely. The recreated castle on the right does have that barbican fully intact. Barbicans were used as a line of defense against invaders, although here it is more for show, as the castle was not meant for combat. The walls of the modern castle, while discolored due to weather, are still intact. The octagonal island of grass in front of the barbican, fittingly named the Octagon, exists in both modern-day and original structures. It has lasted almost 7 centuries. The portcullis, which is the spiked gate that slides up and down to provide another line of defense, has also survived. Now I would like to draw your attention to the windows of the front views here. Notice how the windows on the bottom are slightly larger than the windows on the top. This is a technique called forced perspective. The shrinking of the upper windows makes them appear farther away than they actually are, which makes the entire castle seem larger. Also, the towers are quite fat, but each of them has a smaller tower arising from it, which is another example of that forced perspective at play. The effects of forced perspective are best when far away. When one gets closer to the castle, he or she can more easily gauge the real dimensions of the structure. Now, let's take a look at the rest of the exterior details. I will be going clockwise around the castle. We just viewed it from the north, so let's look at the east wall. We can immediately see that there are a few things inside the recreation that are not present in the modern-day castle, but I will address those later. For now, let's look at outside things like the windows. I took the time to ensure that I included every single one. These windows are mostly all the same size. I find it interesting that Sir Edward Dallingridge decided not to continue with his forced perception on the east side. I believe that it has something to do with the heavy vegetation along the west shore of the moat. People probably aren't going to go through the trouble to view the castle from the side if there's a lot of trees in the way, so perhaps he just decided not to bother with making the windows smaller on this side. Another idea could be that maybe he messed up and forgot to make the windows smaller, so he planted the trees there so that people wouldn't go over to that side and notice. Also, take a look at how the walls are relatively clean looking, except for the moss and slimy stuff accumulating on the bottom next to the water. The water of a castle moat is not something that you would want to find yourself in. This is where all the waste gets dumped, and that includes sewer sludge from the estimated 21 toilets of the castle. Coming around to the back, or the south side, we can see that the forced perspective is back in the windows, and also that there is a drawbridge. This drawbridge did not last through the centuries, and it was only discovered when historians looked at holes in the wall of the south gatehouse and concluded that those holes were for the purpose of the drawbridge chains to come through. We don't know if the drawbridge spanned the entire moat or not, so I just took the liberty of adding this pier out to the halfway point. I took the time to ensure that I had everything accurate down to the number of ramparts on each tower and the number of those supporting pillars here on this southern gatehouse. This side also is protected by a portcullis. Now, coming around to the west side of the castle, we can see that the fourth perspective is again gone in the window sizes. Also, the vegetation is quite heavy. Again. It is so heavy that nobody even bothers photographing this side in modern times. I had to search a lot for this side, and I found only one video of the castle from this angle, and his views of the walls were greatly obstructed by the shrubs for most of the time. I got a glimpse of these windows when the wind pushed the shrubs down momentarily, allowing me to see. Also, I decided to include this pathway here, and while it does exist today, was it really there in the 14th century? The castle was built for aesthetic purposes, and the pathway does add some more aesthetic appeal to the area, so I just decided to include it. Now, let's take a look at the inside of the place. I found a fantastic publication on ResearchGate that had a very accurate floor plan of Bodiam Castle. We can see the octagon at the top and the barbican, as well as all the walls and towers that we already looked at. On the inside of these walls, we can see the chapel on the right, the sacristy right below it, private apartments/suites below that, and the Great Hall next to the southern wall. West of the Great Hall would be the service area, followed by the kitchen. The servants' hall is just north of that. However, they were unable to identify what lay between the stables and the servants' hall. I took the liberty of making that an armory. Another source identified the area between the chapel and the north wall as the servants' quarters. Let's start at the servants' quarters and make our way clockwise. There's not really much to see here, just a few beds, small tables, and personal item cases. I gave the servants these luxuries because, given that Bodiam Castle is a display of wealth, I assumed that the servants' quality of life here was a step up from the quality of life they would have had at other castles. Moving on to the cathedral, we can see that it is tall and has a lot of glass. An organization called English Heritage has a list of the styles of churches that are popular at different time periods. The time period that our church falls into is the late 14th century. This means that the church in Bodiam Castle was likely built in the perpendicular style, which English Heritage characterizes as featuring soaring vertical lines, far more glass than stone, and exuberant fan-vaulted hammer beam or angel roofs. Here's their example of that architectural style. We can see that the roof is perpendicular to the ground and that there is a lot of glass used. We go inside and we can see that the vaulted beamed roof is up there. I have taken the liberty of adding a lectern up front for the priest and the chairs for the congregation. Here's a cauldron of holy water here. Here's the cross. I tried building a Jesus on it, but because that's what many Catholic churches have, but it ended up looking really stupid, so I just left it plain. Over here is the sacristy where they would store things for the service. Here's the priest's robe, some bread and sacramental wine for the communion, and the Holy Bible right here. It's open to the verses that the priest will use in his service. Okay, let me just get outside here. 1 second. Okay. Let's take a look at the private apartments. These were used for visitors and maybe knights and their families, including Sir Edward Dallingridge himself. It's equipped with a lot more than the servants' quarters, featuring 2-story living spaces, double beds, bathtubs, nice lanterns, and even a toilet over here. A wise fish once said all drains lead to the ocean. But that's actually not true here, though, because this one just goes to the moat, and it ends up being really disgusting. We already talked about that. We got some nice rose bushes in a planter here. I added those because it's entirely possible. Let's look at another photo here. We can see that there is a little unidentified structure in this corner that really does look like this planter, so that's just what I made it into. Next up, we've got the Great Hall. Now, this is the centerpiece, the best, showiest place in the castle. If anyone wants to show off their wealth, it's going to be here first. As we can see, this place is grand. We've got double doors, a fancy dining room table for Edward, who would sit here, and his company, who would sit in the rest of the places. Here's a stage where entertainment might play. We've got grand stained glass windows, an arched roof with beams, displays of weaponry, a cool fireplace, and the coat of arms. Sir Edward Dallingridge's coat of arms is simply a white background with a red cross. People were really all over the coat of arms thing back in the day, so they put these things everywhere, from armor to tapestries to flags. The placement of all these things here was at my discretion, since This portion of modern-day Bodiam Castle is so worn down that one cannot identify how the Great Hall actually looked back then. Out here is the back entrance through the south gate. Again, here's the portcullis, which was another line of defense in case the drawbridge failed. Here we've got the service area, where people simply fix things. Travelers with horses and wagons and carts may use this area for repairs and maintenance. And back here we've got the kitchen. Now, medieval kitchens were quite musty and dark, and that's exactly what I did here. There's some stoves, open flames, barrels for storage, and firewood. Notice how the doors here are actually different heights. ResearchGate attributes that to a change in mind of the architects. The next door is the servants' hall. This was attributed to the segregation of the servants from the kitchen. Maybe the servants weren't to be trusted. Anyways, notice how this compares to the Great Hall. It's very plain and humble. There's nothing grand about this place. Moving on, next door we have the armory, which may or may not have existed. People didn't know what this place was used for, so I just felt that an armory would be logical to put here. Here's the coat of arms once again, along with some suits of armor, swords, bows, and crossbows. Here's a chest with more supplies for a potential battle that actually never ended up happening. Here we have the stables. These horses are well equipped with saddles and armor, as Sir Edward would probably want to show off his wealth in this area as well. Hay was a staple food for horses, but feeding them oats enabled them to perform athletically at a higher level. We also have a cat up here, and that was a common practice used for the killing of mice and rats. I'm sure that the cats killed enough to feed themselves, but considering the fact that the bubonic plague was a thing, I don't think that they were as thorough as people would have liked them to be. Okay, let me just get outside here. Let's take a look at the inside of these walls now. As you can see, a castle is a dark place. It's got dark corridors directly beneath the battlements. Here's a dark stairwell. Let's climb it. I'd suggest looking away if you're prone to motion sickness. And now we're at the top of the castle. There's more coat of arms up here that can be seen from a very long distance away. I'd imagine that archers would be up here between the ramparts if this place ever actually did face an invasion. Now I'd like to take you to the southwest tower. This place is special because it has the well. And there's the well. It actually remained undiscovered for hundreds of years. If we travel down this dark corridor, we end up in the southeast tower. Evidence suggests that these towers probably had floors added to them for agricultural storage. Here we've got barrels of food along with melons, pumpkins, and wheat. Let's exit through this dark and dank stairwell. We've got the courtyard here, and I made the paths consistent with what exists today. I'm not sure if it was there in the 14th century, but just why not add it? One last important detail is the serfs living on the land. They're way over here. They were poor and would probably remain poor for the rest of their lives. They farmed the Lord's soil and they paid the Lord some food for the use of the soil. All the food that you saw in the castle likely came from surrounding serfs like these people. We've got some crops growing right here. Some peas are growing on the left, wheat is in the middle, and nothing is on the right. Peas are legumes, and legumes are nitrogen-fixing, which makes the soil rich in nutrients. Wheat depletes the soil, making it less rich. After every harvest, the crops were rotated so that the soil wouldn't get depleted of nitrogen. So, after a harvest, this field might have peas on the right, wheat on the left, and nothing in the middle. The rule of thirds of crop rotation. And those are all the major details that I've added in this castle. Thanks for watching. This was a lot of fun to make. Remember, wash your hands.